This is Bleav in Buckeyes. I'm Brian Browning with All-American cornerback Chinny Checkwa. We got a special show for you guys today. We got one of our guys, Jim Cavale, one of the founders and chairman at athletes.org, to join the show to kind of give us some information about all this gray area, what we think is going on in the transfer portal and our athletes, our student athletes, when it comes to college football and navigating this new world that we live in. Jim, how are you doing? Then Jim, we're gonna kick it to you to see how you're doing. It's spring, man. What's going on, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling good, man. I'm excited to dive into this NIL topic. Obviously, an interest of mine and something we've talked about a lot, right? And I've always been from the perspective that they won't necessarily figure this thing out until there's two sides that are able to negotiate, right? One representing the players and whoever is the entity representing the schools. But right now it feels like the NCAA in some respects, the Big Ten, the SEC, and others, right? So yeah, I'm interested to dive into it for sure.
Wow, it's well said, Jim. I mean, I'm excited for this conversation, and yeah, I mean, it's spring, so I can't really be mad right now. Memorial Day around the corner. It's a great time of year and fun conversation to have with everything going on in college athletics. So thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Now, first, Jim, obviously this is a Buckeye podcast. Me and Jim, we're former Buckeyes. But
Yeah.
first, Jim, I had to ask you, can you just give us a little bit who you are, and then kind of let's get into athletes.org and exactly the great work that you're doing there.
Yeah, so, I'm a former college athlete. I'm from New York, came down to Alabama, played college baseball, never left, moved to Birmingham back in 2005 when I graduated. And for 20 years, I've been an entrepreneur and founder in the sports and fitness space. So I've built, multiple companies in the space, have been fortunate to have some exits. And for me, my story with NIL really starts in the 2010s when I was building a fitness brand called Iron Tribe Fitness. And we had about 50 gyms. We're based here in Birmingham, but had gyms really all over the Southeast. I was really minding my own business, and the commissioner of the SEC came in the gym as a client at one of our Birmingham locations. And so Greg Sankey and I became buddies, and through him, I got to watch the Ed O'Bannon ruling happen in 2016. Ed O'Bannon, of course, beat the NCAA in court for the improper use of his name, image, and likeness. And so I just got interested in like this whole, like, what would happen in college athletics if NIL ever became a reality? And by 2016, I got to the point where I was like, you know what? There's going to be a lot of problems in college athletics to solve. And so I sold Iron Tribe. My partner bought me out, and I started building a company called Influencer in 2017. John Calipari, Kentucky basketball, was really instrumental in helping me come up with the idea. But basically they said, listen, our players need a lot of help on social media. They're always asking for pictures and videos after practice, workouts, games. If you can build technology to get it on their phone automatically, we would pay for that. And so that's what Influencer was when we got started in 2017 with Kentucky basketball. But my vision was NIL is going to happen at some point. If we can help with this social media stuff, when NIL happens, we'll be able to help with that too. And so by 2019, we had 3,000 pro and college teams using Influencer software, and Teamworks, a company that all the pro and college teams use for other purposes technologically, like communication, scheduling, et cetera. They hit me up and were like, we want to buy Influencer. We want you to stay on board as CEO and build for NIL. Because by 2019, the Fair Pay to Play Act had been passed in California, and we all knew that NIL was coming in 2021. And so we did that in 2021. Schools like Ohio State and 220 schools around the country use software we built for NIL that basically stored all the transactions the athletes were making, whether it came from a collective or from a brand. And so by 2022, we had $350 million of NIL deal data. And you got all these people watching what's going on through the media, like, oh, this guy Nico just took a deal for $8 million to go to Tennessee. And I heard this deal got done with this quarterback at Florida, but he didn't get paid. And we're sitting there with actually a system of record, like what really is going on. And so what I could see was that out of the $350 million we had in our system from year one of NIL, 90% of the money was coming from donors. They were laundering money through a shell company called the Collective to pay players to play at their school, And so I would tell ADs and commissioners that, and I would say, hey, don't shoot the messenger. This is what's happening. And the reason we're here is because O'Bannon beat you and you didn't create structure and get in front of it. You let it happen to you instead of you making it happen the way you think it should happen. And so, that's my story. And for me, I ended up selling and stepped down as CEO of Teamworks in 23 to build athletes.org, because I'm a firm believer that the only way you can create structure in college athletics, whether it's transfer rules, free agency rules, compensation rules, salary caps, health and safety standards, is you have to collectively bargain those rules between the athletes and the schools. And so athletes.org is built to be the players association to represent the athletes in that hopeful collective bargaining negotiation that's upon us in the future. So that was my quickest way of telling you my story, but it's been an evolution from being an athlete to being an entrepreneur in the space to now leading this players association, for me to be in a place where I feel like we can really push change for athletes in college athletics in a positive way.
I love it. And I'm curious your perspective on, we heard recently that President Trump was creating some initiative. I'm not exactly what the details of it are,
Yeah.
of, trying to create some structure around NIL, and Nick Saban was potentially going to lead part of that. I'm interested in your perspective on that. Are you aware of it, one, and then two, what do you think comes of that? And do you think that that's a promising direction in any way, shape, or form?
So, I'm very aware of it. I've talked to one of the co-chairs already. There's going to be two co-chairs, including Saban. The rumor is that President Trump will pass an executive order to create the Commission for College Sports. That commission will have people that represent kind of all the different moving parts in college athletics. Let's hope that means that the athletes are going to be represented on that commission. And the commission's job will be to create a structure as a recommendation to Congress to get a bill done on. And so I don't know how much this commission can really accomplish without Congress. And the reality is right now, Congress can't agree on anything. And the reason we're here is because for decades, college athletics leaders, presidents, and ADs have been asking Congress for what's called an antitrust exemption, which would allow college athletics, the NCAA and the conferences, to set rules that they can enforce without athletes being able to sue them. But they've never gotten it. Congress has never granted them that. And, there's an automatic antitrust exemption you get when you collectively bargain, which is why I'm a big believer that the only way that college athletics will ever get the ability to set rules without being sued is to let the athletes sit at the table to negotiate the rules. And so, I think the commission's good because the president is paying attention to college sports. But I don't think the commission can get everything done without Congress being involved. And I don't think Congress is going to just grant the NCAA and the conferences some antitrust exemption without the athletes sitting at the table being able to negotiate for themselves.
Yeah, that's good that you kind of bring up that point. And obviously, you guys are doing fantastic work in trying to essentially, make a union here, right? When it comes to college athletes and speak for them as one voice. And I guess in history, right? You just learned that the most unrepresented group are the universities, right? You're there 4 or 5 years, and then you go on with life. There's not usually someone that could take the time to kind of put a group together and be able to speak on behalf of issues and things like that nature. And obviously, you guys are trying to tackle that issue and that problem. But I guess my question is, how do you go about it? Obviously, there's a hundreds of school on what the FBS level, and then you start looking at the FCS and things of that nature. How do you guys kind of pinpoint exactly where you guys want to be? And who you plan on working with, and how do you plan on, keeping things up to kind of speak once again on their behalf when it comes to, I guess, the universities and their collections, things of that nature?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is for me, for almost a decade, I was partners with all the schools through my software companies, right? So I worked and signed deals, with ADs and commissioners and the people leading college athletics. And a lot of them became close friends. And then all of a sudden in August of 2023, I stepped down as CEO, and a week later, I'm launching a players association. So you can imagine how that was received.
Right.
But the whole time for the last 20 months since we launched athletes.org, we've been trying to build a bridge. Most of what college athletes want isn't much different than what college athletics leaders want. It just has to be a fair deal. And it's not what I think or my partner, Brandon Copeland, thinks. It's what the athletes think. We just have created a vehicle. They got to drive it. And to drive it, they got to care enough about this to want to learn the things they need to know to be able to influence things that have to happen. And that's a key here because I think some people might think like, oh, this guy is a power broker trying to, get the athletes to do a certain, no, like I'm building a vehicle for athletes to actually have a voice. And, that's never been done before, but it's still got to be based on what the athletes want. So on the school side, I think, my job has been day to day talking with athletic directors, talking with folks from Congress. We've written a bill that we've used to show Congress how we could have collective bargaining for non-employee college athletes. So they don't have to be employees to bargain with the legislation we've written. There's a lot of Democrats and Republicans that like that bill because it's bipartisan. The Republicans get non-employment status, which is something really important to them in the schools for college athletes to have non-employment status. But the Democrats get collective bargaining, which is something really important to the Democrats and the athletes to have a seat at the table. So whether it's that, whether it's the conversations I have with ADs, most of which now want collective bargaining because they're so sick of there not being rules, we're trying to build a bridge, not create this us versus them thing, even though we obviously are representing the athletes as a whole. And so like my partner, Brandon Copeland, is an undrafted free agent from Penn who played 10 years in the NFL and just retired 2 years ago. 3 of his 10 NFL seasons, he was the player rep for the NFLPA for his team. He voted on the 2020 collective bargaining agreement when he was a New England Patriot. And so he really understands this. And both of us really care about the younger version of ourselves. So we are trying to pour into 18 to 24-year-old college athletes and not just give them a free membership where they can sign up for free and get a bunch of great benefits like legal, accounting, mental health, agent background checks, but we're also trying to give them a voice. And that's the real important part. They got to step up and want that voice.
Yeah, I want to, something that you mentioned before is that there was like 350 million in NIL deals, and 90% of it was coming through collectives. From your perspective, all of those deals, and we see a lot of reports, right? This guy was asking for this much, that guy. Are the reports that come out in terms of how much a player's worth, how much some of these massive deals that we see some players signing, some guys out of high school, how accurate would you say from your perspective those reports are versus what you've seen in terms of activity?
Well, it's tough to fully answer the question because there are a lot of transactions that never get reported. I like to joke that NIL really stands for now it's legal because it's always been done, but under the table. Matter of fact, that's the name of my podcast, shameless plug, now it's legal, because that's what NIL stands for. But for the deals I've seen, it's both. I've seen deals that are reported that are actually less than what athletes are getting. I've seen deals that are more. So it varies. But what's interesting is right now we're at a time where there's a settlement of several court cases against the NCAA and the schools. And all of these court cases are about the schools directly paying the athletes. So that 350 million, that's outside of the gross revenue the schools make. So when you look at college sports, as of 2023, the total revenue of college athletics was just under $18 billion that year. Okay. Now for perspective, the NBA that year did 10 billion in gross revenue. And so did Major League Baseball did 10 billion. NFL did 20 billion, but college athletics, really college football, is bigger than the NBA and the MLB. Okay. The difference is the players get half the money in those leagues. Okay. 5 billion of the 10 billion goes to the NBA players. 5 billion of the 10 billion goes to the MLB players. 10 billion of the 20 billion goes to the NFL players. College athletics, that's not the case. So there's court cases that are saying, yeah, NIL's on the outside, whether it comes from donors or brands, it's on the outside of the 18 billion. We need to get part of the 18 billion to be shared directly with the athletes. And these cases, there's 3 of them, Carter, Hubbard, and House, have all been settled in the House settlement. And the House settlement is probably going to be ruled on in the next week or 2, but it's very likely to be approved. And it will allow the schools to directly pay athletes up to $20.5 million a year in year 1, starting later this fall. And so what's happening is the market's inflating. So a lot of these deals you're reading about might be even more than what the athlete's worth, because schools are rushing to do collective deals with donors now before the settlement starts, so that then they have more room within the 20 million to also use that to do deals with the players after the settlement gets ruled on and those terms start. And so in this year in particular, 2025-26 academic year, you're going to see, I think, higher deals that are either going to set the market high for 26-27, or they're going to come down, and we're going to find out how that goes. But like, it's a really crazy time. So a lot of these deals you're reading about are real. And if anything, they might even be lower than what the athlete's going to end up with.
This is why Texas has so many defensive linemen on the transfer portal. Yeah, this is the reason why they're putting the money up this year in particular.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I wanted to kind of ask about, it's kind of been rumored right now, like you said, the school are going to start kind of chipping in and helping out with some of these funds. But I know you've been kind of hearing, I think Kirby Smart has a statement out there, like, things are getting so inflated, things are getting much more expensive. How is college going to keep all sports, right? You talk about Ohio State, who has, I think the most varsity
30
sport
plus
program.
sports.
Yes, but yeah. So, in your opinion, if you think it's going to, they'll figure it out, they better keep all these sports, or is it going to dwindle down and you just see football, basketball, baseball, things of that nature, and some of the things like pistol and women's hockey, kind of fall by the wayside due to the change in college sports?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question. And unfortunately, right now we're in a time where the economics are not favorable for college athletics, and it's a bubble that's going to burst. I'll just give you an example. Ohio State had gross revenue of over $300 million this past year, which was the highest across all the college athletic departments in the country. But yet they lost about $30 million, and they didn't make money, they lost money. Okay. So if Ohio State is losing money, you can imagine how all of the other schools are doing. None of them are rolling around in a bunch of money and profit. Now, some of this is because their expenses are inflated, including the salaries that are paid to coaches and the buyouts paid to fire coaches and ADs and administrators' salaries. But also expenses are inflated, like who had the first barber chair in the locker room, right? Ohio State, right? So the expenses could be decreased a little bit. But the reality is there's no school with 20 million just laying around to start paying athletes next year. So all of them are going to have to go to the university and ask for help, or to donors and ask for help to come up with that 20 million. And there's also a reality that, most of that 20 million is going to be paid to football players, because football produces most of the gross revenue for the school. But there's probably going to be lawsuits from female athletes who play non-revenue sports, because they're not getting an equal share. So there's an assumption there'll be a lot of Title IX lawsuits once this settlement begins and the 20 million begins getting paid out by schools. And so it's a really interesting time, because even if every school, 75 of them, let's say, in the power conferences, pays 20 million a year next year, that's $1.5 billion. Only 1/3 of them are going to have like a good season where the people giving the money feel like they're getting a return. So at what point do they stop putting in on the 20 million? And then how does that impact what talent is on the football team? And then how does that impact what the football revenue is for the athletic department? And then how does that impact how the athletic department's able to even be able to fund the other sports? So there's some real issues here. And the only way that I see fixing it is for football to separate into one league. If football separated into one league, like I said earlier, college football is the second most popular sport in America. And I know the Big Ten and the SEC have a lead on the others. But if you had a 60-team league that was going to the media for one media deal, instead of a separate media deal for the Big Ten and a separate media deal for the SEC and a separate media deal for the ACC and so on, you would have billions more a year in value for that media deal. And that would allow these schools to afford the athlete payments, but also affording the other sports. And I think that's where it ends up, but it's probably not going to be until 2030 or so when these conference media deals are up.
Yeah, and that kind of starts to answer what my next question was going to be, in that, the difference between college football or NCAA athletes and the NFL and basketball and NBA, baseball is the amount of athletes, right? And the level of team, where, you know, in baseball, you might have the New York market versus the Cleveland market, right? But in college football, you have Ohio State, you have Notre Dame, you have Texas. You know, you have these big time schools, and then you have, you know, the Boise States, you have
Or even Rutgers and Mississippi State.
yeah, even within the same conference, right? You know,
Right.
Ohio State is playing on Fox, Big Noon, almost every weekend to carry this Big Ten media deal with Fox, right? And at some point, you know,
the team up north doesn't have any impact, right?
They have almost zero impact.
Zero, yeah.
They had their year. They had their year where they carried it.
Asterisk years. They had their asterisk years. Yeah,
yeah, they had their year. But going forward, it's looking like Ohio State is going to have to put the Fox Noon media deal on their back moving forward. From a representation standpoint, as a union, or, you know, representing the players. I know, you know, one thing I sometimes had challenge with the NFLPA is that, you know, you negotiate a new deal and not every player agreed with that deal, right? Some guys are like, man, the guys who came to the table and made this deal did their best effort. But maybe this is more beneficial to older players. Maybe this is beneficial to guys who've been in the league longer. Maybe this is benefit, right? Because of who's sitting at the table. When it comes to college, there's like more representation necessary. And how do you solve for the challenge of, you know, there's a different level of athlete, there's different types of athletes, different level of school that need to be represented in these types of negotiations?
Yeah, so before I go into that, you brought up something that I think is going to be really interesting to your viewers and listeners, and that is right now, when it comes to media companies in college football, there's only like 12 teams that they care about having on their network. Now they'll have the other teams outside of the 12 on there as long as they're playing one of the 12 teams.
Yeah.
But there's really only 12 teams that bring all the value to the college football media deal. And there's schools like in the Big Ten, you got, I think, about 5 of them. You got USC, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan. Sorry, I said it on the show. And Ohio State. I tried not to. I tried to say the team up north. I just messed up. Maize and Blue. And so that'd be the Big Ten. And then the SEC, you got the Georgia, LSU, Texas, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee schools. And then, you know, you keep going. But what's interesting is they split the media deal for the conference evenly.
Right.
So Rutgers and Northwestern get the same share of the Big Ten media deal as Ohio State and Penn State. Okay. Now, if you take it a step further, when you win a CFP game, you get a bonus. If you win all the games up to the championship, you can earn, at least this year, $20 million. Ohio State earned $20 million for going to the title game. Guess who got to split it with them? 17 other Big Ten teams. So Ohio State made less than $2 million for making it to the national championship. Notre Dame isn't in a conference. They got to keep all $20 million of the money they made to get into the championship game. So they just got their first year of house settlement payments to athletes by making it to the national championship. This is a big problem in the 2 big conferences that everybody says are going to run away and control college sports, because inside of those conferences, there's schools that bring a tremendous amount of upside, but don't get it financially. And instead, the teams that might not bring as much upside get to share evenly. And so this is an issue in the ACC, which is why Florida State and Clemson sued the ACC, because they know that them two, and probably maybe a Miami and a couple others, bring the majority of the value of the ACC, right? So this is something to watch for your listeners and viewers here. Going into what you said, I think you're always going to have that issue, right? Like, there's deals that you can do that are going to be more favorable to veterans and build a pool that incentivize them to stay at a school and get a bonus for committing and whatnot, but might hurt the 5-star who's just coming in and prevent them from being able to get too big a deal. It can go vice versa. This is why you have to have a process for voting. And that voting process has to get a certain percentage. Usually it's 51. And who's voting, like you said, matters, because you have to have different types of athletes that have different perspectives. But there's never going to be a perfect deal. to your point. But there is a way to have a more fair deal, not only from compensation standpoint, but also from free agency and transfer rules standpoint. So we can have commitment brought back into college football. And even from a health and safety standpoint, I mean, the term student athlete was created by a guy named Walter Byers, who wrote this book here. Walter Byers was the president of the NCAA for 37 years, created amateurism, and created the term student athlete so that when Ray Dennison died playing football, they didn't have to pay his family workers' comp, right? So student-athlete was created to stop schools from having so much liability when athletes get hurt or fatal injury. And this book was written because Walter Byers condemned everything he built after he stepped down as president of the NCAA because he got conscience, right? And so health and safety is a whole other part of this that nobody really talks about that's really, really important. You guys know athletes put their life on the line for their school, and then it's over. And yeah, everybody's going to go to the NFL and everybody's going to play 10 years, but we all know it's 2.7 year average. So like health and safety matters just as much as eligibility rules. We have to figure out what the right amount of years for an athlete to play is, so it doesn't spawn into a 45-year-old athlete playing college sports, but at the same time, an athlete has a chance to play a certain amount of years. Academic requirements, so that academics can still be an important part of the college athletics experience. All of these things that fans want can be figured out, but you have to let the athletes sit at the table and vote on what they think is best and agree to the rules so that lawsuits don't keep happening.
Gotcha.
The great words of Cardell Jones. We didn't come here to play school.
I just talked to Cardell recently for the first time. I could hear him saying that.
Yeah. That was young Cardell.
Yeah, right. That was before he won that national championship. Right. But Jim, I have one more for you. And me and Jim both played football in the National League, and we understand that, for there to be a union, there's costs, right? You got people representing the union, you got lawyers, you want good lawyers, right? You try to put a CBA in place, right? How do you guys envision, I guess, covering the costs of what it takes to run? How does that work for you guys?
That's a great question. It would be exactly like the pro unions do. So pro unions have two revenue streams. The first revenue stream is member dues that the players pay under a collectively bargained agreement. So once we actually can collectively bargain for the athletes, we will agree to terms with the athletes on a small percentage of the amount we're negotiating for them as member dues. The second revenue stream that pro unions generate money from is group licensing. Example of that would be the Madden game that the NFL Players Inc., which is a partner of NFL Players Association, negotiates for the players. That game does $1 billion in sales. The players get about 150 million of that split amongst them. In college football this past year, we saw the video game come back. EA Sports brought back college football 2025. The game did over $1 billion in sales, and the players got $600 and a copy of the game because there was no union representing them in the negotiation. If they got 15% royalty like they have before in the NFL, each athlete would have got about $10,000. So that's the difference of the players not being represented in that video game deal versus being represented. And of course, as the negotiator of that deal, we would get a fair commission that's standard. So those are the ways we'll generate revenue, but we have no revenue right now. We've been operating for 20 months. We have a pretty awesome team. We got a legal counsel led by Jim Quinn, who's won every major case against the leagues for the players' behalf over the last 40 years. We're spending millions of dollars a year on an operation that doesn't generate any revenue yet, because we believe one day there'll be a business to build, but also we'll do something that's never been done before in history, which is get the athletes to the table to negotiate for themselves.
Yeah, that's great. That's great work. Chum, anything else you got?
I think the one other question is valuation. And, you mentioned 90% of the dollars coming from the collectives. And one of the issues we see right now is really identifying how much a player's worth is. What is the value? Just from your perspective, how would you define what a player's value is and how you think would be best to determine it?
Yeah, so what's interesting about this is all the payments, whether it's a collective deal or now these school deals, they're all still NIL deals. Now, we all know that's not real. They're not really NIL deals. They're pay-for-play deals. They're performance deals. But they're disguised as NIL deals because nobody wants college athletes to be employees. Why don't they want college athletes to be employees? Because they don't want to pay workers' comp, employee payroll taxes, minimum wage, and overtime, which would be another 8 figures a year that the schools would incur in expenses. So they're so sensitive about college athletes becoming employees that they want to disguise these pay-for-play deals as NIL. Why does that matter? Well, that matters because a real NIL deal is an endorsement deal like Patrick Mahomes does with State Farm. A real performance deal is the quarterback deal Patrick Mahomes signs with the Kansas City Chiefs. The quarterback deal with the Chiefs, we know what it is. We know how much it's for. We can see the incentives if he makes All-Pro, if he gets into the Super Bowl. It's all public. But we never will know what he gets from State Farm because that's his information. And so the reason all of that I just went through is important is because it's tough to know the valuation without knowing what athletes are actually being paid. And we'll never know what athletes are actually being paid until we stop calling these NIL deals and actually start making them performance deals that are negotiated under a collective bargaining agreement. At that time, the market gets set because we can see what all the athletes are getting paid to play their position, and we can see how they perform statistically in that position. And then the market sells. It's just like real estate. It'd be really hard to figure out what your house is worth if there was no data around similar houses that were being sold in a similar place. But there is data. And because there's data, we can get a good estimate on what you should sell your house for. That's the problem we have with valuation right now. And the only way to get around it is stop lying. I'm talking more about what the leaders are doing. Stop lying and calling these NIL deals. They're not. They're pay-for-play deals. Classify them as such and allow the data to be public so that people know what athletes are getting paid. And in return, you can see how their performance correlates.
That's good. That's good. Well, Jim, we really appreciate the time. I know you got, obviously, you're on social media, right? You have a Twitter. You got athletes.org that all athletes can kind of go and sign up to be a part of the, let's say, movement, join the join the union, so as such from there. And obviously, the work that you guys are doing, it was much needed. And obviously, now that you kind of have money coming in, you could do it. But obviously, this has been needed in college sports for 100 years now. Yeah. And we're glad that you guys are taking the time, making the sacrifice, and doing the work that is needed to kind of do it and do it right and do it smart, so it could mean something and it could last and it could be the future of college sports. I really appreciate you for that work.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate the conversation, and I know you guys contributed a lot on the field, and I love seeing how you're now contributing to the bigger picture for athletes to learn and hear about all this stuff. So thank you for your work.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep, and we're going to end this show as always. Jim, feel inclined to join if you would like. I know you're a New York guy, you're down south now, but we end all our show with a nice OH.
Ayo.
Go Bucks.
How do I do that?
There you go.
I got you.
No,
All right,
we
guys.
appreciate it, Jim.
Hopefully I'll see you soon in Columbus.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, when we see you, we're going to yell out OH.
Okay, and then I'll say IO. I got it. All right, Jim. All right, guys. Thank you.